This video was made in association with KnifeInformer.com. Head on over to Knife Informer for all of your blade-related needs, including reviews, comparisons, stats, and more. What is up, everybody, and welcome. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at this Koenig knives Arius. Now, this knife is super cool. I know a lot of people in the community are interested in it, and so I'm really excited to finally be able to bring it to the channel. Now, it's worth saying that there will be a couple moments throughout this video where, you know, this is a relatively new company. This is their first, major knife that they've produced. So there are obviously areas in which, they've taken feedback and they've been sort of improving the knife over time. So this knife is on the older end in terms of the time scale of how long it's been in production, and there have been some updates to the knife over time. So I'm going to do my best to give you sort of the objective review of the exact knife that I have sitting in front of me, and I'm going to do my best in every case that I can to alert you to the things that have changed or have been improved since then. So there's a couple things on this knife that I really don't like, but it doesn't really matter if you go buy a new one because they've been solved. So just bear that in mind. This video is of a little bit of an older Arius. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at the stats, and we'll jump into the features and flaws. Now, first of all, the overall length of this knife is going to be about 8.75 inches. When I was measuring it earlier with my ruler, it seemed to come in just like a little bit under that, like 8.65 inches. But 8.75 is sort of an understandable number, and so that's about the size that you're looking at in terms of the overall length. Now, the weight on this knife is about 4.75 ounces. Now, there's a couple things to keep in mind there. First of all is that this is the marble carbon fiber version. We, of course, have a titanium frame lock on the lock side. And so do bear in mind that, this knife comes in multiple configurations. You can get it with carbon fiber. You can get it with another slab of titanium on the presentation side here. In addition to that, this knife does not have any internal milling. There are no cutouts or pockets on the inside of this frame, whereas he has started to introduce those pockets on future builds. So do bear that in mind, that the knife will probably actually be a little bit lighter if you go buy one now, as opposed to this older version that doesn't have pockets. But also remember that this version with the carbon fiber is going to be a little bit lighter than the titanium version. So really you can get one of these pretty much in any weight range that you want. But for the overall length, less than 5 ounces is good. So I imagine with the pockets it'll be a little bit lighter than that, which is going to be a great weight. Lastly, let's check out a size comparison. This is going to be a Rat 2. And, the Arius is not a small knife. And we'll take a look at the PM2 as well. So I'm just going to let you guys take a quick look there. Don't need to get too into it. You can see it's pretty much larger than the PM2 in just about every sense of the word. And so yeah, it's a bigger knife. The general size, and I'm going to go back to comparing it to this knife later in the video for other areas, but you can really think of this knife as like a Shirogorov 95, right, or F95, or the Haiti, or Hattie, I guess is actually how you say it. I've always pronounced it Haiti. But just think of it as being sort of a knife like that. The Shiros are going to have a slightly longer blade. Those knives are full 9 inches, where I said this one is 8.75. Most of that length is gained in the blade length compared to the Shirogorov. But do note that that's essentially what you're buying here in terms of the overall dimensions. So now that we've checked out the size comparison, let's go ahead and jump into the features and flaws. So, of course, the first thing to do is we're going to go ahead and just take a quick look at the knife, sort of go over the materials that it has, and just do a quick little showcase. Going to get this vertical satin finish on this blade polished up a little bit for you guys, so we can take a nice close look. Wipe down some of this titanium. I must say, they did a really good job with sort of all the contouring and chamfering and all the edges on this knife. So you'll see here we are taking a look at this Titanium frame lock, as I mentioned before. You can get different show scales, but you're always looking at a titanium frame lock with the Arius. We do have this very cool pocket clip with hidden hardware, and you can see that you can actually see through the clip and through the frame by the relief cut. I'll close the blade here so you can see what I'm talking about. Very neat little feature there. We are looking at a pretty clean blade overall. So you can see we have the horizontal sort of rough satin finish on the flats and a vertical satin finish on the primary bevel. We'll of course take a closer look at the blade in the blade section. And I really like this marble carbon fiber. I think they did a really good job with it. Not everybody's a fan, but it's very smooth. You can see it's contoured. And, you know, very well finished. No voids or anything. Although marble's usually pretty good about that. You can see we have this unique pivot, which I really like. It's very concave. You can sort of put your finger in it and feel it. It feels good. Machined very well. Very clean edges. And it has this sort of shape where, you know, it automatically locks into place, which I really like. We do have this blue titanium backspacer, which gives us a little bit of a lanyard area. Finished well, chamfered well, and sort of integrated into the shape of the knife, which is nice. Even though it does sort of protrude, it's not hard to imagine that the knife would have made that shape even if this lanyard hadn't been there. Blackened titanium screws on this one. And yeah, so that's the materials and sort of a close look at the knife overall. Let's go ahead and talk about the ergonomics on this one. So this is going to be sort of an interesting aspect of this knife because I'm not really sure how I feel about it. The ergos, they leave a little bit something to be desired up in this area here. And it isn't so much that I dislike the overall shape. It's more that like this area here gets a little bit too thin to be, I don't know, to feel really present in the hand. It's kind of interesting. So you can see here your two fingers definitely fit into this little pocket here. The curvature into the flipper tab is excellent. Obviously that's going to protect you from sliding forward. And then your two smaller fingers are getting over this really large fat rear end, which is good, which I don't mind at all. Your thumb kind of naturally wants to sit right here on this ramp. There's no jimping here, which maybe it could have done for, honestly, considering that's where your thumb naturally rests. What they did bother to do was chamfer this little interior area, which if any of you remember back to my, where is it? Larevo Knives mini Tribeca video, that's something that he did on this knife as well, and I ranted and raved about that because that sort of internal chamfering does a lot of good in that area. You know, if you are flipping the knife, that's of course the area that your finger lands in, so it's kind of a nice pocket for that, and it feels good to have your thumb in it. The only problem is your thumb really doesn't naturally rest there. You're really kind of more forward, otherwise your middle finger's sort of on this point here, which is not super great. So you do end up kind of choking up on the knife as much as possible. And ultimately, I don't know, I just wish there was a little bit more material left in this pocket right up here. It just gets very thin. And so because of the thinness here and the thickness here, it almost just feels a little odd in the hand. But by no means are the ergonomics poor. It does fit in the hand very well. It's very comfortable. I don't detect any hot spots. There's just a couple of little quirks that, you know, maybe I wouldn't have put into the design if it was me doing it. But again, I'm not a knife designer, so that's not really saying much. Now, moving on to the next area, we have to talk about this clip. Now, this is one of the major sections that I spoke about earlier when I said that we were going to have to, you know, talk about some improvements that have been made. So you'll note right off the bat that the ramp on the clip is very shallow, not very high, and the rest of the front of the clip is very blunt. Now, the problem with that is if your seam on your pants is thick like it is on my pants, you can't really get the clip to ramp. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. I'm going to cut to a clip that I recorded for a friend on my phone, and we'll just take a quick look at that, and I'll show you guys what I mean. Okay, so now that you've seen the clip, there's a couple sort of notes that need to be made. First of all is that this same exact clip, I've had multiple friends tell me that, you know, they lift their clip, and so that's not an issue. I don't lift my clips. I don't think you should have to, especially on an expensive knife. I really like being able to put a knife into my pocket with one hand, or if I do have to use two hands, you know, it's more just to like hold the seam of the pocket in place while I push it past. But really, I don't feel like I should have to lift a clip if I don't want to. So there was that argument of like, I just lift my clips. And then Dr. Frunke, who, if you guys aren't already familiar with, definitely go check out his YouTube channel. He's fantastic. But Dr. Frunke has the same clip on his, even though his is a newer Arius. And he sent me a video comparable to the one that I just showed you, where the clip was ramping over the seam of his pants without issue. So I don't know if that's just, you know, my pants have really thick seams, and so that's the difference. So I don't want it to seem like, because of that video that I just showed you, that like this is an impossible to use clip. It's not. It just really isn't great. Now, having said all that, Dr. Frunke recently reached out to Bill of Koenig Knives and you know, mentioned the clip, and Bill was sure to say that this is actually an issue that they've already considered addressing. Not only that, but they've just finished prototyping the new clip with a better ramp, and they actually intend to send that to Dr. Frunke to experiment with. So do know that if you order a knife moving forward, that really shouldn't be an issue for you. But if you're buying a used Arius, do consider the thickness of the seam of your pants, or whether or not you're comfortable lifting your clip, because it was an issue for me, and I really didn't enjoy carrying it for that reason. But I'm a pretty picky dude, and I understand that. Now, the next area that we're going to jump into is the action. So I always break the action down into two sections. First, we're going to talk about deployment, and then we're going to talk about closing. Now, talking about the deployment on this knife, the detent is, I would characterize it as sort of like medium strength. The knife deploys, again, very similarly to like a Shirogorov F95. It is worth noting, though, that the Shirogorovs that I've handled tend to have slightly lighter detents than this knife, but they seem to deploy with sort of the same speed. So you can kind of see here that the blade, even though it deploys very confidently, very consistently, and there's no risk of it really not achieving lockup, it doesn't deploy with like incredible speed. So it's just sort of a smooth, clean deployment. It has kind of a unique set of acoustics to it, but it's not very loud. You can sort of hear a metallic sound as the blade deploys, and that's just the acoustics that have resulted from the detent rubbing along the detent track. And so ultimately, it's a pretty satisfying deployment, but I've had more satisfying deployments for sure. One thing that must be noted about deployment is that this flipper tab, I can tell you right off the bat, was a shape that made me disinterested in the Arius, and ultimately that's why I never purchased one. So I did manage to get this one on loan. I guess up to this point I actually forgot to mention who it's on loan from, which is my friend Josh, aka Echo Does Knives. Go check him out. Very thankful to have this knife on the table. But yeah, the flipper tab always made me feel like that just this wasn't going to be a knife for me. I don't know why makers design these upswept flipper tabs with sharp points. Don't you guys understand that like I want to deploy it more than once at a time? Like, It's just uncomfortable. I really don't understand this design. And even though these edges are broken and it's fairly chamfered, it's still pointy. I mean, it's still digging right into your finger. So, Dr. Frunke, I'm given to understand, sent his Arius back and had Bill sort of shave off the edges, and that's worked for him. And that's been a solution. I do believe that on newer Ariuses, they're probably going to adjust that design a little bit, but I can't confirm that for sure. However, the flipper tab is not the only thing of note here. As you guys can see, we do have this fuller moving into a hole on the top edge of the blade. And that, of course, does allow for the middle finger flick. Now, you can thumb flick this knife, but I really struggle with it. I don't think I'll actually be able to do it on video. It's weird. Sometimes I get it right and it shoots out, and I'm like, yeah, I should be able to do that repeatedly, but I don't know. I have some sort of weird issue. I've never been a thumb deploy guy anyway, so I guess I just really don't have my my sort of shit together, I guess, as far as it goes. But the middle finger flick does work very well. It is my preferred method of opening on the knife. It doesn't require any effort. It's really got great leverage. Your finger goes right into the hole. There's no chamfering, so it catches your fingernail, which I've always preferred. And it's just a really pleasing deployment. It does deploy faster this way than if it did with the flipper tab. So I really enjoy the different opening methods on the knife. And if you are a thumb flicker, I'm confident that you can figure it out and do it consistently. I've just had trouble with it because, I don't know, because I'm an idiot, I guess. But jumping into the next section is going to be the closing of the action, and that has to be described even more like the Shirogorov F95. The sound it makes when it stops, like when it lands in the close position, it's pretty identical to the sound of a Shirogorov 95, and in all the ways that the deployment was dissimilar from the 95, the closing is similar to the 95. It's basically a Shirogorov when you close it. You can see very consistent, very smooth. Gravity does all the work. It sort of gains momentum like a Shiro. Whereas, where it's sort of teetering on the edge and then it gains momentum and closes at a very rapid rate. Super smooth. Maybe a slightly deeper tone in terms of the acoustics compared to the F95 because it's I think the frame is a little bit thicker. Who knows what this knife is going to sound like with the internal milling, though. That could change the acoustics on it quite a bit. So yeah, if you guys are looking for a good knife to fidget with, this is definitely one. As long as you can get that flipper tab worked out, or if you intend to not really use that and just deploy with your middle finger, this is a great fidgeter. It's just a great knife. It's really well built. It definitely, at the price point that it's offered at, competes very well among the other knives in sort of the same sector. So the last thing to talk about here is going to be the blade. The blade steel that we're looking at is 204P. We have a sort of general drop point blade shape. You can see we're working with a very tall flat grind with a vertical satin finish, as we mentioned earlier. The flats on the knife have a sort of rough horizontal satin finish. And one of my favorite aspects is this swedge that's actually hollow ground very deeply. So check this out. I don't know if I can you see that? I don't know if it's going to focus well enough. But this swedge here is a super intense hollow grind. I'll try to show you with lighting. And I love that. It's you wouldn't notice it unless you touched it. It just sort of like looks like another flat grind at first glance. And then once you touch it and you feel how deep it is, here you can see from the top end how deep it is. Check that out. It's so cool. It's one of my favorite aspects of the blade. Very subtle, very hidden, and then super cool when you figure it out. Ultimately, knife is going to make a great slicer. You have almost
I'd say maybe 3/4 of an inch, if not more, of flat grind to work with. Very tall. The blade stock is, pretty standard, I would say, but they do a good job of thinning that out behind the bevel with the tall flat grind. Yeah, you could get things caught up in this fuller and this finger hole, but I mean, that's true of a lot of knives now. A lot of people are doing cool stuff with their blades, so I don't think that should deter you too much. But yeah, that's pretty much going to do it for this one, guys. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. If you would like to reach out to me for any reason whatsoever, you can do so by emailing me at tovarishworks@gmail.com. If you'd like to see beautiful pictures of all these sweet knives, you can do so by following me on Instagram at tovarishworks. Longtime followers will notice that I went back to a sort of zoomed in camera angle. Let me know what you think about that. I think the problem before with being so close was that I had very rapid hand movements. So it was very disorienting to have sort of the whole screen moving around the entire time. I feel like I've done an improved job, and I'm looking to continue to improve in sort of the ways that I utilize my hands on camera. But I didn't like having to hold the knife all the way up in the air just to show it to you guys. I can sort of rest my elbows and show you the whole knife and keep it in frame instead of trying to hold it up real high and having to stand up to be able to see the camera and all that. So let me know what you think about the zoomed in angle. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I will see you next time.